Hello. Good evening. My name is Ken Estes. I'm the Ag Program Manager with CCE Livingston. I also own and operate Joplin Farms, Morgan Horse Breeding Farm in Caledonia. My family has been farming in Caledonia since 1832, so I'm the sixth generation, so I have a long legacy with Livingston County, and I'm proud to be a resident. As well as before I took this role, I spent 25 years in owning and operating a design build landscape firm where I install design build landscapes, a few of which are around the lake, as well as all over the area, and some work even in Ohio. With that, I come to this position with a degree in landscape architecture from Cornell. I have a degree in associate's degree in natural resource environmental conservation from Morrisville, and I'm actually pursuing a master's in community and economic development from Penn State currently. So programs like this are very important to the mission. And one of the things that I would like to do is thank the Conesus Lake Association and the Watershed Education Center, along with Livingston County Cornell Cooperative Extension, for providing opportunities like this, where we can exchange knowledge and resources to empower our community to do good with that. So tonight we're here to talk about rainwater harvesting and rain gardens and design. So why not? Why manage stormwater runoff? Depleting aquifers, plant-friendly watering, increasing cost of municipal water, and why not? So rainwater harvesting is a process of collecting rainwater to utilize it in your landscape, in your garden, in your home, for many uses. As the quote says on the screen, as long as water is not a problem, people will seldom care where it comes from or how it's delivered, as long as it's there and usable. So when we talk about stormwater runoff, which we may or may not experience in a few hours, I think we have a severe weather warning currently for the area. So we see situations like this that's presented on the screen, where we see muddy water at the water's edge. We see catch basins that are overrunning. So we have issues around erosion. When we have muddy water like that, that's definitely shows signs of erosion, leach pollutants, and municipal infrastructure expenses that are a result of that kind of stormwater runoff. So depending on who you talk to, runoff is a bigger issue than others. Urban runoff is much more a cost and a problem than it is in our rural settings. But with roofs, with parking lots, with hard surfaces, patios, and even turf, there's an excessive amount of water that's not going into the ground and is going into a tributary and most likely going to end up in your lake or in Conesus Lake. So it promotes the movement of water away from the home and into storm sewers. So we create these processes that protect our water. There are some common issues with stormwater and runoff that are shown on the screen here. Pet waste, we may not think of as a pollutant, but it is. Sediment, fertilizers, and lawn chemicals. And that's in your own use as well as in agricultural use. Detergents and paint, yard waste, motor oil, and antifreeze, all are contaminants that can cause issues in our water. So when we look at stormwater runoff, to kind of give you an idea on the volume of water, when we get an inch rain on a 1 acre, it generates about 27,000 gallons of water. 1 inch of rainfall on a 220 by 50 mile heavily urbanized city generates about 17 billion gallons of water. You can see that could be a problem. So when we look at solutions to stormwater runoff and how we may capture some of that water for our use, one of the most common ones that we all may think of is a rain barrel. A rain barrel is utilized to collect water from a downspout. We actually had a great UII program that happened a few months ago here that showed how to create these as tools in your arsenal to utilize for many uses. I'll make an example. One such conservation group in Chicago sold over 3,000 rain barrels in just a few months, and they didn't even have a storefront. They offered the rain barrels free to consumers as a means to step us in the right direction. But one of the characteristics that make them not as effective is their size. They don't collect a lot of water. 50 gallons of water is typically what the barrel is. And I will mention there's another caution that I'll bring to the table in the fact that if you have asphalt shingles and you're collecting rainwater from an asphalt shingle, there are potential contaminants that are in that water that would discourage you from utilizing it for food production. It still can be used for many other things, but for your vegetable garden or any food production, I wouldn't use a rain barrel that was from a asphalt shingle roof. So we can go bigger. And this is a process of looking at some ideas that take rainwater harvesting to the next level. And we see a variety of containment systems that are capturing water to use as rainwater harvesting. You can get large tanks and cisterns that increase the water storage capacity. The big tanks are being delivered on, large trucks, so that takes up a lot of space. So that's a downside of them with that. Above ground systems are a good source, but below ground systems tend to have more advantages than above ground system. So in the landscape, we can look at other solutions that provide for ways of collecting water that actually use the environment to help purify that water for use in your garden. This system is a commercially available system that allows for a containment system that actually filters as a pre-filter in that catchment that comes off of the downspout. So as water goes into it, it filters out any of the large debris, and then it's collected into a tube and then goes into a containment system that's below grade to hold the water. In that, then there's a system of a pumping system that actually pumps that up into some sort of landscape or water feature that ends up recirculating it and helps purify that water, so then you can use that purified water to utilize in your garden. And it also has an overflow system in it that allows for excess water to go into that picture on the far right, as you look at the screen, is actually a leaching system that takes the overflow water and lets that percolate back into the ground. And the system is called a rain exchange system made by Aquascape. So when we talk about how can we use the rainwater that we're harvesting, we'll go through a little bit of we can use it for landscape irrigation for lawns and flower beds, like I mentioned, to be cautious about for vegetable beds. You can use it for washing your car, patio, or deck. You can top off your water feature, your swimming pool, your hot tub. And you can protect your property from wildfires. Hopefully we'll never have wildflowers in the Conesus watershed, or wildfires in the Conesus watershed, but as we've been experienced, the smoke can be quite effective to our environment. And we also can use them as gray water for toilets, laundries, and water supplies. And as another caution, it's not potable, so it's not a drinkable source of water. So rainwater is actually better for your plants because it holds all that nutrients that are in the water rather than a municipal water supply. So we'll talk about bioretention. Does anyone know what the word in my audience that's live here know what bioretention is? It's a big word. I'll give you that. It provides water remediation at the source point. So it's a tool that typically is used in a commercial setting, but it has made its way to the residential landscape scale. Typically, it's a large acreage that it's accommodating. So it's an area of 2 acres or less, not super large, but bigger than most lots around the lake. It's used where land used to include highly impervious areas like parking lots, roadways, and cul-de-sacs, parking islands. There are a few examples, none of which are in Livingston County, unfortunately, that I'm aware of, that if you travel to Monroe County, there's a few islands that you'll run across in parking lots that look different than what an average one will look like, with mulch and trees that are above the grade of the curb cut in most cases. We'll go on and show you some pictures of what they are. And they're used by homeowners to be green. So look at a cross section of bioretention in theory. We'll see that there's curbs for a parking lot on either side of the garden. The topography of the garden is slightly depressed, so it'll hold water. The curbs actually have cuts in them, so the water will infiltrate into the bioretention planting area, and it'll go down through an engineered soil that allows for the water to be filtered. And then in some cases, depending on the soil characteristics, in some cases you need an under drain, which is the exfiltration trench that's at the bottom of the schematic. There's a drain that connects to the storm sewer in there. So this is a means of cleaning the water, creating an island that's both attractive and environmentally friendly, And we'll talk more about the plants that'll go into that type of a arrangement when we talk more about rain gardens, because it's the same concept that we'll talk about next in the concept of rain gardens. And if I didn't mention earlier, if there's ever a question that comes up during the talk, the audience definitely interrupts me, and anyone that's on the Zoom, feel free to pop it in the chat, and our group will send it back to me as well. So another concept that is much more popular in the realm of residential landscaping is the concept of rain gardens in a neighborhood setting. So this schematic gives you an indication of what the visual from a cross-section perspective a rain garden encompasses. It collects water from the downspout, so it runs the same principles as a rain barrel, except that it's running the water into the ground in a depression that allows for the water to sit for a period of time, and they're designed differently to hold for as little as a half a day to as long as 2 days, depending on the soil conditions and your design principles as far as what you're wanting to achieve. So look a little more in detail in the rain garden. So like I said, they're similar to bioretention, but on a smaller scale. They are especially useful for downspouts to clean rooftop runoff near streams, can clean contaminants from lawn runoff, and within storm water runoff areas. They filter sediments and contaminants before entering the stream or storm system. And compared to a conventional lawn, a rain garden can allow 30% more water to soak into the ground. Rain gardens are also a wonderful habitat for wildlife and can be an attractive asset to any property. And unlike a bog, rain gardens hold water for only 1 to 2 days. So when we talk about site selection, here's some principles to where to situate a rain garden on your property. You want to determine how large it's going to be, the foundation of your property lines, and where they're located, downspouts and overflows, locations of trees, locations of utilities. All those are the contributing factors in the position of where you may want to put your new rain garden. They are installed at a minimum 10 feet away from a foundation. They can be any distance that you want to pipe the water off of the property. And much like we'll learn next month, but in any case, water movement needs to stay within your property boundaries. So you can't create additional runoff off of your property with the overflow potential of a rain garden. So you have to kind of take that into consideration when you're designing it. And typically they're like any landscape bed. They're shaped aesthetically appealing. So kidney shape is pretty much a common characteristic of a rain garden. So they can be put anywhere, from a commercial setting to a very modern house in a front yard. They can be in a backyard, formal, natural, full sun, full shade. They can utilize native plants. They can utilize a variety of shrubs, grasses, and even small scale trees. They can accommodate both wet and dry conditions. And that's one that you may not think of, that the plant that are in a rain garden are suitable for dry conditions, because when we don't have rain, they have to be able to tolerate the lack of water. So I'll run through some slides from a construction project. So typically they're shallow, 2 to 8 inches. They typically will have a relatively flat bottom. You can use hand tools to create them, or you can use machinery. And they typically will require amended soil, especially if it's poor soil. And there are some soils that are less accommodating to rain gardens than others. And they tend to be a clay soil that holds the water and doesn't let it percolate down through it. So in those conditions, typically you can still create a rain garden, but you'll have an overflow that's actually an underflow that allows the water to exfiltrate to another source. But it still runs through the process like the bioswale does, or the bioretention does, and cleaning the water as it goes through the system. So typically there's zones within the development of a rain garden. So you have the bottom portion of it tends to be plants that will handle being drowned by water. And then there's typically a medial zone that's around the perimeter of it. That's kind of the sides of the plant that are able to handle a little less water than the bottom zone. And then there's typically a buffer zone that's at the lip of the planting that is pretty much your typical plants. So you design it the same way you would design any planting. You make it aesthetically appealing with the height selection of plants within it. You define the edge like you would any other planting bed, and you can use a mulch in it as well. So this kind of gives you an example of what the first growing season may look like for your garden. Has some space around it. The plants are young and they're growing, but there are a wide variety of plants that are aesthetically appealing within that. So you probably wonder what kind of maintenance is involved with a rain garden. So when it comes to maintenance with a rain garden or anything that we're using as a containment system for water to purify it, we don't want to put contaminants in it. So we don't want to put fertilizer on these plants. We want to limit the soil and debris. We want to remove weeds by hand, no herbicide. And typically they will take watering the first year, much like any other plants that we put in our garden. There's usually a little bit higher maintenance that's involved with plant installation in the first year, possibly the second year, but as the plant matures, it's more capable of handling the variety of weather that we may put in front of it. And then we want to limit compaction. You want to treat the rain garden like you do your vegetable garden, that you try to minimize your walking in the garden. So in some cases, we will put stepping stones in there so that we're actually walking on part of it rather than walking on the soil structure. So when we look at, as things grow, you can see with the development of this picture here, it's much more full. It's more of a resemblance typically of a native garden where there's no formal design to the character of it. It's more wild New England style garden. We'll see some examples of that in the next few slides. So as we can see, there's a depression, there's a hard surface to the right of the photo, and there's garden to the average person, you wouldn't even think that was a rain garden. But it's designed and built as a depression to hold water that runs off from the lawn and from the hard surface, and slowly percolate into the ground. Here's another example. Utilizing hydrangea in the forefront there, some daylilies. But it's very simple and subtle. It doesn't look like something not typical in a landscape. Here's another example. This one is classified as a butterfly garden. Anything that has flowers is going to bring butterflies in typically, so they just focused on plants that are more flower suitable.
You see you have a drain down there. It's like a drain.
There is a drain, so that's when the water becomes more than capacity for the rain garden. It's an overflow for it. And you'll find that with design, whether it's a rain garden or a bioswale or a bioretention, that typically they'll have a relief valve on some of them to when we have the 100-year storm that makes it over capacity, rather than flooding the debris and everything out of the rain garden and the plants out of it as an overflow design. That's.
I was going to ask, could you speak a little bit more about that? If we're new to this, but know that we need to put a drain in place.
You don't always have to put a drain in. So when you're considering a rain garden, understanding your soil characteristics is the primary concern. If you're installing a rain garden around the lake, where we have highly alluvial soils, in fact, if we dig down, we'll actually find water table. You don't need to put an overflow in that because the water is going to percolate down through it. Where we have heavier soils or water, it takes longer for it to percolate down through the soil. Having an overflow may be part of the design concept as you design it.
I have a different area, and I do know that we need to install one. But maybe I'll touch base with you offline.
Okay.
Just get your guidance.
Yeah. So, typically when you have to install they're called exfiltration system. So you're retaining water, exfiltration takes it someplace else to do something with it. Whether it goes into a storm sewer or goes into some other type of containment system before it gets to a stream or to some stormwater management, there are ways that you can still filter that water and slow it down so it will percolate into the soil. But we can talk more offline as far as how we can, and that's one of the things that I'm going to talk about. Every site is different, so it does. One of the things that I offer throughout Livingston County is my expertise to come to you free of charge, I will mention, to give you some guidance on site selection and the design criteria to help guide you facilitate a successful garden. And then, like I said, you can put them in shade. So here we've got a still bee and some natives mixed in here. So they're all much more adaptable than you might imagine as far as how they will fit into a landscape. And hopefully they're going to become more and more common by providing you resources and education so they can be utilized to help mediate the water that comes from all your hard surfaces and enters our lake, because they all contribute to the conditions that we see in the lake through that. So anything that we can do as homeowners to create beauty, but yet still be environmentally friendly are positive actions that we can take. So already had a few questions. Are there any questions? Were there any questions that popped up in
You have a question. It says, can you speak on the past laws of gathering rainwater in New York State?
Past laws of gathering rainwater in the state. Well, the collection of rainwater started a long time ago. I am not familiar with current legislation that restricts the collection of rainwater. Generations before us utilized cisterns. In fact, there may be some of you that have either a home or a grandparent's home that had cisterns inside of it. Both my farmhouse and my mother's farmhouse have cisterns in there. The ones in my house are no longer functioning because they weren't designed to last 150 years. But the one in my mother's is about 2,000 gallon tank that's right in the center of the house. That's still a functioning water source that we use for gray water. So I can look into that if there's any restriction, but I'm not aware of any restriction legislation wise that restrict you from collecting your own rainwater off of your hard surfaces. There are probably some restriction on in certain municipalities how you can utilize that water for use within the environment. Thank you.
You mentioned that to be cautious about using water from an asphalt roof. Does it make any difference the age of the roof? Like a freshly put on roof is more hazardous than a 20-year-old roof?
No, I would say that potentially the older roof may be more because there's more debris that's coming off an older roof than a newer roof. But they're all made, they're asphalt-based products, so they're an oil-based product that they're manufactured with. So there's an oil contaminant that has to come off the roof every time a water droplet crosses it.
Is there anything that could be done? I have steps that go down from the road, and so in heavy rain, the water just pours down the steps. Is there ground cover you can walk on that's helpful to sort of absorb some of that? It's hitting hardscape down at the bottom too, and there are gardens there that are grabbing it, but there's a fair amount of hardscape going down, and then at the bottom it's on hardscape too.
Yeah, there's actually some tools, and I've installed a few of them that actually take a hardscape and turn it into a permeable patio. So it looks from the surface, it looks just like a normal patio, but the gaps between the pavers are a little bit wider, and the sand that's utilized between the joints is a little bit coarser. So the water goes down through the paver, and typically they're not installed on a compacted base. They're installed on a mix of gravel particle sizes that's not compacted, so the water will actually filter down through it. And they're being used both in landscape settings and large scale settings. If you go to Fenway Park in Chicago, the parking lots around that facility are all permeable asphalt. And the water all goes down through the asphalt, and that's actually asphalt. So it's similar to what your macadam is for a roadway, but the pores between it are porous, so the water goes down through it and it filters it.
It would be such a huge expense to change out all the hardscape. Can I just change the sand between it? I've been
Most likely not. If I would do some sort of bioretention at the edges where the water of the patio goes away, where you install some sort of filtration system around the perimeter. And I've done that in a few cases where the slope of the patio typically is about a 1%. You really can't tell that there's a slope, but if a heavy rain comes, the water will sheet across it. And you determine where that location is. And at the edge of the patio, you excavate and put a bioretention at a smaller scale than what I showed you there, or even a rain garden at that edge, whatever size that you seem adequate, and let the water drain and hold there. I've utilized them as a non-planted surface, so they're just a gravel median with engineered soil to allow water to percolate into it, hold it. A gravel surface is going to have more pores to allow the water and air to exchange, so you could potentially utilize it that as a possible solution. Any other questions? Plants? Or
I know that you said this, but my ears are, I'm hearing everything you do. We do have asphalt shingles, and so obviously vegetables is not where our rainbow would go, but flowers.
yeah, I mean, and I want to preface that it's not to a point of discouragement from collecting the water. The amount of residue that would come off the roof is pretty limited. So using it on a flower bed is probably going to be okay. I just caution against using it for anything that we're going to consume.
Okay, does the same thing apply to metal roof?
Typically, no. There's metal roof is a little better, especially if it's a newer style roof. There isn't anything that comes off of that. I utilize collection off of my barns for my livestock. And those are metal roofs for that, and I have that tested. I test my collection water as well as my well water frequently to determine whether or not I'm getting any potential contaminants.
Thank you.